For many years, Egypt was in decline, the country was divided, and the northern lands were under the rule of foreign Hyksos. The temples were deserted, and the pharaohs were losing their influence. But times changed, and Egypt began to come together again, slowly but resolutely. From a weakened kingdom, it would soon turn into a mighty empire stretching from the deserts of Nubia to the shores of the Levant. This is a story of the return not only of power but also of faith in one's own strength. You are watching amazing history. Here, antiquity breathes through the ages. Today I will tell you about the chapter of Egyptian history that is rightfully called the Golden Age, who stood at the origins of the new kingdom, and how the country rose from ruins to become a superpower of the Bronze Age. Stay with us. Let's go. By the beginning of the 16th century before Christ, Egypt was far from greatness. The country was divided. In the north, the Hyksos ruled as foreign masters of the Nile Delta, introducing new military technologies. Their chariots and bows intimidated the locals, and Egypt appeared only a shadow of its former self. But far to the south, in the city of Waset, which the Greeks would later call Thebes, defiance was growing. It was here that the surviving remnants of the Egyptian nobility were located, and it was here that resistance to the invaders began to form. The local rulers were vassals of the Hyksos, but their obedience was only superficial. One after another, the Theban pharaohs rose up against the invaders. Though many fell, one man changed everything, Yahmose. Little is known about the youth of Yahmose, but the main thing is known. He brought the struggle that had begun to its conclusion. Under his command, the Egyptian army took revenge. The Hyksos were expelled, and Egypt was once again united under the rule of a single pharaoh. Yahmose became the founder of the new 18th dynasty, and thus opened the era that we now call the New Kingdom. It wasn't just the return of power, it was Egypt's rebirth as a civilization. And this time, it didn't just get back on its feet, but prepared to step far beyond the borders of the ancient Nile. With the victory over the Hyksos, Egypt not only regained its land, it gained a new self-awareness. It was no longer a state defending its borders. Now Egypt looked beyond the horizon. Its pharaohs no longer wanted to wait for threats. They went out to meet them. The successors of Yahmose, Thutmose, Amenhotep I, and especially Thutmose I began a policy of active military campaigns. In the south, Nubia was conquered, a land rich in gold and manpower, and the Egyptian armies reached as far as independence. In the lands where the river becomes narrow and turbulent, fortresses were built and large-scale exploitation of resources began. But the real challenge came from the lands to the north, Syria and Canaan. Thutmose sent his forces there when he decided Egypt should control both its borders and the region's trade routes. His campaigns initiated the first significant contacts with Asian powers like the Hittites, Assyrians, and Mitanni. This is how the imperial model began. Conquered lands became vassal states, local rulers submitted to Egypt, and wealth flowed to the pharaohs, funding temples, tombs, and palaces. Holding the empire was as hard as creating it. The next generation of Thutmoses, including Thutmose III, known as the Napoleon of ancient Egypt, turned Egypt into the most powerful state in the Middle East. Their army marched to the Euphrates, and their enemies chose negotiation over resistance. Thus, Egypt entered its golden age, a time when it ruled not only the land, but also the minds of peoples who looked upon it with awe and fear. At first, everything seemed to be going as planned. After Thutmose II died, his young son Thutmose II I became king. The issue was, he was only a few years old. Egypt needed a ruler, and this power vacuum was filled. Hatshepsut, the daughter of the pharaoh, the wife of the pharaoh, and, as it turned out, the future pharaoh herself, at first acted as regent, but soon, breaking all traditions, Hatshepsut put on the royal regalia, ascended the throne as the full ruler, and ordered herself to be depicted with a beard and in male clothing. Thus, Egypt saw the rise of a woman pharaoh, a rare, bold, and by the standards of that time, revolutionary phenomenon. Hatshepsut's rule became a time of prosperity. Instead of conquest, she focused on trade and architecture. The most striking example was her expedition to the mysterious land of Punt. The fleet returned with incense, gold, trees, myrrh, and exotic animals. All of this is immortalized in the bas-reliefs of the temple at Deir el-Bahri. Hatshepsut built to reinforce order, not for glory. She restored temples destroyed during times of turmoil, expanded the temple of Amun at Karnak, and erected architectural masterpieces comparable to the pyramids. In terms of ambition, her reign became a model of stability, spiritual revival, and economic growth. But after her death, what we would now call an information war began. Her name was erased from bas-reliefs, and her images were destroyed. Perhaps this is how Thutmose, who took power after her death, tried to erase the facts of her reign from history, but he did not succeed. Her buildings and image have endured for centuries. Hatshepsut showed that Egyptian power relies on both the sword and ideas. After Hatshepsut's death, Egypt once again turned to military expansion. Thutmose III, having grown up, began a series of brilliant campaigns. He not only restored the former borders, but expanded them more than anyone before. The victory at the Battle of Megiddo symbolized a new era. The Egyptian army confidently moved north to the border of Mesopotamia. Thutmose III founded an empire stretching from Nubia to the Euphrates. In the conquered lands, he appointed Egyptian governors, collected tribute, and invited local rulers to the pharaoh's court. It was not just control, but a system of political influence where soft power coexisted with the sword. Amenhotep II and Thutmose IV inherited this model and continued the campaigns and construction, but true flourishing occurred under Amenhotep II I. His reign became a symbol of peace. He did not conquer by force. He initiated negotiations, exchanged letters and gifts with the rulers of Mitanni, Hattusa, and Babylon. This correspondence has reached us in the form of the Amarna letters, a unique diplomatic archive on clay tablets. Amenhotep III was not only a skilled diplomat but also a brilliant builder. It was during his reign that Thebes became the center of temple architecture, the Temple of Amun, the Colossi of Memnon, and luxurious palaces. The cult of Amun reached unprecedented power, and the priests themselves became almost equal in influence to the pharaohs. This was the golden age of the New Kingdom, a time when Egypt shone in every sense, art flourished, poetry lived on papyrus, and trade connected Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean. Egypt did not just dominate, it inspired. However, in the midst of outward greatness, tension was growing within Egypt. The priesthood of the Temple of Amun was becoming too powerful, the temples were getting richer, and the pharaoh himself was increasingly losing his monopoly on power. Not political, but sacred. And then a man appeared who decided to overturn the very essence of Egyptian faith. Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, the son of Amenhotep III, soon changed his name to Akhenaten. Favored by Aten, he elevated the new power of Aten to the top of the pantheon, the sun disk, the divine embodiment of light. For the first time in Egypt's history, the pharaoh rejected Amun's supremacy and introduced a one-god cult. Of course, this was not full monotheism, but one god was revered above all the others. Akhenaten went further. He built a new capital city, Akhenaten, now known as Amarna, far from Thebes and its temple bureaucracy. Amid the sands, he built a kingdom of light, with family feasts, prayers, and rituals for Aten. The images became softer, more human. Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti were depicted in scenes of family life, playing with their children under the sun's rays, but behind this poetry, upheavals were hidden. The cult of Amun was suppressed, its priests lost power, its name was erased from temples, political stability faltered, provinces disconnected from the center, and northern territories broke away. After Akhenaten's death, a boy named Tutankhamun appeared on the throne, soon renamed Tutankhamun. This clearly signaled the return of the cult of Amun. Uniphoron became a symbol of the religious revolution, restoring the old order and refilling Amun's temples with offerings. Tutankhamun died young at 19 and was hurriedly buried, but his untouched tomb made him the most famous pharaoh for generations. After him, power passed to the temporary ruler's Eye, then Horemheb, who finally rolled back all of Akhenaten's reforms and restored the traditional pantheon. The religious experiment was over, but its echoes would continue to resonate in Egyptian culture for a long time, as a reminder that even in empires with centuries-old traditions, ideological earthquakes can happen. When Ramesses II took the throne, Egypt's traditions were restored, temples filled with priests, and the gods had returned. But with the arrival of this pharaoh, the state entered a phase of ostentatious power and grand ambitions. He didn't just rule, he built an era under his own name. Ramesses II began his reign young and ruled for a long time, more than 60 years. From the first years of his reign, he led campaigns in the north, striving to maintain the Egyptian empire in Asia. His most famous military episode was the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites. This battle went down in history as the first one we know about from both written and pictorial sources from both sides. Although both powers proclaimed victory, in essence, it was a heroic stalemate, and later, the first known international peace treaty in the world was concluded. Then Ramses focused on strengthening power and promoting culture. He ordered scenes of his victories to be carved on the walls of temples, and his name on the walls, obelisks, and statues throughout the country. But Ramses was not only a warrior, he was a builder, a patron, and a showrunner of his time. He built magnificent temples in Abu Simbel, where his giant statues are carved into the rock and look out over the Nile. He expanded Karnak, arranged sacred lakes and palaces, and he even built a new capital, Per-Ramses, in the Nile Delta, emphasizing the shift of the center of power from south to north. Ramses' religion was rising again, Amon's priests were thriving, and said jubilees, symbols of royal renewal, were celebrated more frequently than under previous pharaohs. By the time of his death, Egypt was at its peak, rich, stable, and feared by its neighbors. But this peak, as with all civilizations, turned out to be a turning point. The following pharaohs no longer possessed his charisma, resources, or luck. Despite the giant temples and victorious campaigns, Egyptian daily life thrived, vivid, complex, and lively. The new kingdom was a period of political expansion and cultural maturity. Women, despite the patriarchal system, had unexpected freedom. They could own land, participate in trade, and get divorced, although pharaohs were almost always men. It was during this era that we encounter Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, and Tiyu, women whose influence was felt at the state level. Education became the main way to rise in society. The Egyptian bureaucracy needed literate scribes, and this created a unique class of educated people who left behind hundreds of papyri, records, and inscriptions. Dr. L. Medina, the settlement of craftsmen who built the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, has given us dozens of texts ranging from love lyrics to everyday quarrels and supply lists. In this same place, we find literary tales and fables where animals behave like people and heroes reflect on fate, honor, and love. Religion permeated all spheres of life. During this era, the main sacred texts were created and canonized, especially the Book of the Dead, which was placed in the tomb of everyone who could afford it. Amon, Ra, Osiris, Isis, Hathor, Thoth. There were many gods, each with their own sphere and rituals. By the end of the New Kingdom, zoomorphic cults grew in popularity, and animal mummification, cats, ibises, crocodiles became widespread. Nevertheless, images were not only cultic. On everyday objects in tombs, we see scenes of music, dancing, games, and feasts. Life, with all its joys and worries, left its mark on stone and clay. And all this was under the watchful gaze of pharaohs and gods in a land where art was not a luxury, but a language connecting the eternal and earthly greatness, not eternal itself. After the death of Ramses, Second Egypt seemed to grow weary under its own weight. Later pharaohs took his name, Ramses III, IV, V, but lacked his strength. Although Ramses III tried to stop the catastrophe, it was already moving down the Nile like an unstoppable flood. His reign became the last flash of glory. He fought against the Sea Peoples, mysterious invaders whose fleets ravaged the shores of the eastern Mediterranean. He defeated them and settled them on lands under his control. But this only postponed the inevitable. The country was experiencing famine and social instability. It was during his reign that an unprecedented event occurred, the first recorded strike in history. The workers of Deir el-Medina, the builders of the pharaoh's tombs, stopped working because they were no longer given bread and beer. They wrote a complaint, sat in front of the temple, and waited. Egypt, seemingly unshakable, began to crack at the seams. Ramesses III was later killed in a harem conspiracy. His weaker, poorer successors, Ramesses IV through IX, led to the dynasty's rapid decline. A whole series of reigns, short, chaotic, and leaving almost no trace except for dilapidated temples and disturbed tombs. Eventually, power in Egypt split. The priests of Amon in Thebes were nearly independent from the pharaohs, and the country's outskirts fell out of control. The last ruler of the new kingdom, Ramses XI, is remembered as a shadow of former greatness. His reign was overshadowed by the transition to the Third Intermediate Period, a time of fragmentation and foreign influence. Thus ended the era that began with the expulsion of the Hyksos and the rise of Yahmose, not with a bang, but with a weary sigh. But even when Ra disappeared beyond the western horizon, he did not vanish forever. Egypt awaited a new dawn, in a different form and with different rulers, but always with the memory of what it had been in its golden age. That's all from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye, everyone.